Battle of the Coral Sea was fought May 4th through 8th, 1942, in the Coral Sea by Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, which is located just north of Australia. The two main combatants in this battle were the United States and the Japanese. The U.S. had 2 fleet carriers, 9 cruisers, 13 destroyers, 2 oilers, 1 seaplane tender, and 128 carrier aircrafts, and the Japanese had 2 fleet carriers, 1 light carrier, 9 cruisers, 15 destroyers, 5 minesweepers, 2 mine layers, 2 submarine chasers, 3 gunboats, 1 oil tanker, 1 seaplane tender, 12 transports, and 127 carrier aircrafts. The battle lasted a total of 4 days.
Rear Admiral Frank J. Fletcher commanded American fleet, and Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi and Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Inu led the Japanese fleet. There was a total of 1,617 casualties from both sides, with the U.S. having 443 killed and injured, and Japan having 1,074 killed and injured. There was no prisoners of war on both sides. The type of battle was the first air and sea battle in U.S. history.
This was the first air and sea battle recorded. It was the first aircraft carrier battle ever fought, and the first naval battle in which the two armies' fleets of ships never saw or fired at each other. All attacks were carried out by airplanes. It was also the largest naval battle that has ever been fought off Australia's shores. The Battle of Coral Sea was the first air-sea battle in history and helped the U.S. to maintain its foothold in the Pacific theater. The battle was significant for 2 main reasons. It was the first time in World War II that the Japanese experienced failure in a major operation, and the battle stopped the Japanese seaborne invasion of Port Moresby. This series of encounters were a significant boost to American morale as they began to gain confidence after beating the Japanese in one of their major campaign objectives. This series of encounters were a significant boost to American morale since they began to gain confidence after beating the Japanese in one of their major campaign objectives. This battle was significant for the U.S. because the Japanese fleet had several prior victories and were looking to start pushing the U.S. out of the Pacific by taking Port Moresby near Papua New Guinea. But the United States managed to hold their position.
The aerial and naval battle conducted as Allied forces invading the Philippines began with the Leyte Island on October 20th. Actual combat began on October 23rd. The main 2 combats were the Allied powers and Japanese. Japan had 1 fleet carrier, 3 light carriers, 9 battleships, 14 heavy cruisers, 6 light cruisers, and 35 plus destroyers. The Allied forces had 8 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 18 escort carriers, 12 battleships, 24 cruisers, and 141 destroyers and destroyer escorts.
The battle lasted 3 days. It started on October 23rd and lasted till the 26th of October 1944. The commanders of the Allied forces was Admiral William Halsey and Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid. For the Japanese, their admiral was Somu Togunda, Vice Admiral Takeo Krutia, Vice Admiral Soju Nurishima. They commanded these 2 fighting fleets. Japanese losses included over 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 6 heavy, 4 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, along with several hundred aircraft and over 10,500 sailors. Allied loss were only 1 carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort.
The first organized kamikaze planes began to dive into the escort carriers that had just fought the battle off Samar, which inflicted additional losses. This new form of warfare took the Americans by surprise. They had to somehow compensate for it because the Japanese would frequently resort to the deadly tactic until the end of the war. Crippled by their losses, the Battle of the Leyte Gulf marked the last time the Imperial Japanese Navy would conduct large-scale operations during the war. The Allied victory secured the beachhead on Leyte and opened the door for the liberation of the Philippines. This in turn cut off the Japanese from their conquered territories in Southeast Asia, greatly reducing the flow of supplies and resources to the home islands. Despite winning the largest naval engagement in history, Halsey was criticized after the battle for racing north to attack Ozawa without leaving cover for the invasion fleet off Leyte.